Okay, we are observing this topic number 6. So last point, there are 2 points are there: the concept of active principle and the major metabolic activity pathway of carbohydrates and proteins. So in this lecture we will see about the major metabolic pathway of the this carbohydrates, right, and their production as a therapeutically active. So what is the role of the carbohydrate? So already in physiological studies we are knowing. So in nutrition view, so carbohydrates are defined as the science of how the body utilizes the food to meet the requirement for development of growth, repair and the maintenance. So here you are observing, this is a small photograph of these carbohydrates. Generally the feeding of the small child is there. So nutrient quantity per day for the humans, it is generally having the energy 8700 uh, kilocalorie, then proteins 50 grams, fat 70 grams and carbohydrate 310 grams, right. So it is getting from this one: sugar 90 grams, sodium salt 2.3 grams and dietary fibers 30 grams, saturated fatty acids 24 grams. So about carbohydrates, these are the most organic molecule on the earth and they are defined as the aldehyde or the keto derivatives of polyhydric alcohols. For example, glycerol on oxidation is converted to D-glyceraldehyde, which is a carbohydrate derived from the trihydric alcohol, that is glycerol. And all carbohydrates have the general formula C11 CnH2nOn. For it can be rewritten as CnH2n, like this, right. Then classification of carbohydrates we are knowing. They are commonly grouped under the monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides and polysaccharides. Monosaccharides, good example, erythrose, ribose, glucose. Disaccharides are sucrose and lactose. Oligosaccharide, maltodextrose, and the polysaccharides are the starch, cellulose, dextrin and the dextran, right. Then in metabolism, thousands of chemical reactions are taking place inside the cell in the organism. So when we are taking the crude drugs are there, so what are the, how they are showing the pathway. So types of metabolic pathway are catabolic pathway, anabolic pathway, amphibolic pathway. Then stages and phases of metabolism are primary, secondary, tertiary. So as a food molecules are there, so these are simpler molecules converted to. Then amphibolic pathway is started. It is anabolic and catabolic. In catabolic, CO2 and water get separated, and in anabolic, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids and nucleic acids are developed. Then in this one there are the different cycles are there carbohydrate. So we are knowing glycolysis, citric acid cycle, gluco gluconeogenesis, then glycogenesis, glycogenolysis, hexomonophosphate shunt and the uronic acid pathway. So according to the different scientists, the glycolysis, as it is called as embedded Markov pathway or EM pathway, right. So glycolysis is defined as the sequence of reactions converting glucose or glycogen to the pyruvate or lactate with the production of ATP, adenine triphosphate, right. So as per the clinic aspect, so we are interested in the what is the therapeutic production. So normally 4 to 15 milligrams per liter. Then mild forms, there is having the strenuous exercise, shock, respiratory diseases and cancers. Then severe forms are there: impairment or the collapse the circular system, right. Then hemorrhage is there. Hemorrhage means excessive bleeding and severe shocks. The cancer and glycolysis generally seen in the cells, human cells are there. So increased uptake of glucose and the glycolysis in the cancer cell. Then blood vessels unable to supply the adequate oxygen, hypoxic condition develop, and anaerobic glycolysis generally. It shows hypoxic glycolysis involvement of hypoxic inducible transcription factor HIF. So therefore use the drugs that inhibit vascularization of the tumors. So tumor formation is generally seen. Then we are knowing citric acid pathway. So in citric acid or the Tca Krebs cycle is there. So here essentially in citric acid pathway essentially involve the oxidation of acetyl CoA to CO2 and H2O, and this cycle utilizes about two-thirds of the total oxygen consumed by the body. Therefore, the Tca Krebs in 1937 studied this study of oxygen consumption in pigeon breast muscles, and they have seen the mitochondrial matrix and in the close proximity to the electronic transport chain. About 65 to 70% of the ATP is synthesized, and therefore it is known as the TCA used because at the outset of the cycle tricarboxylic acid participated, so it is also called as a TCA cycle. So this is just outline of the cycle is there. So you are observing pyruvate, NAD, NADH, CO2 is liberated, then citrate, isocitrate, then alpha ketoglyceric acid, succinyl CoA, and there is a release and intake is there, right? So just we have to give about the how the carbohydrate is developed. Then importance of gluconeogenesis, third next cycle or Cori cycle. So in this scientist given in TCA cycle mitochondrial there is an encephalopathy occurs due to the furnace humarase deficiency, and therefore it is a mitochondrial myopathy affecting the both skeletal muscles and the brains. So it badly affect on this one. Therefore carbohydrate plays the important role. Then brain CNS are there. So erythrocytes, testes are there, and the kidney medulla dependent on the glucose as a supply of energy. Under the anaerobic condition, glucose is the only source to supply skeletal muscles. It occurs to meet the basal requirement of the body for the glucose, and in fasting for the even more than a day, right? Then effectively it clears the certain metabolites produced in the tissues that accumulate in the blood. In Cori cycle it is shown that we are knowing the liver is there. So in liver generally from muscles to the muscles from liver the glucose is getting, and so it is converted and taken into glycogen. Glycolysis takes place, the CO2 and H2O gives the lactate, and this lactate is obtained from the muscles. So fatty acids generally produced, so ATPs are developed, so like this one. So it is due to this in this cycle. Then glycogen storage diseases are there. So there are 5-6 types are there. So in the type 1 von Clark's disease, glucose 6 phosphatase deficiency, it causes the enlarged liver and the kidney, and gastrointestinal symptoms are there. Nose bleeding is there, or short stature, or the gout formation. Then type C POMS disease, acid maltase deficiency. It shows the heart failure, muscle tone, and enlarged tongue. Then type 3 Caries disease. It shows the debranching enzymes. So what is the pathway and how it affect therapeutically? Its uses, how it is used. In fourth type, Addison's disease is there. So branching enzyme disease, deficiency. It causes the enlarged liver, spleen, cirrhosis, or diminished muscle tone, or the affect the nervous system, right? Then type 5 Mardel's disease is there. So muscle phosphorylase deficiency, so muscle weakness, fatigue, and the muscle cramps are there, right? Then types of the different enzyme deficiencies are there. So in 6 type the liver phosphorylase deficiency, it causes the enlarged liver, short stature, generally seen in the childhood. So like this, seventh one is there, the uh, phosphofructogenase deficiency, so muscle pain, weakness, and the decreased endurance. So like this, all these are there. Then mucopolysaccharides we are knowing, so they causes the defect and the symptoms. So mental retardation, micronathia is due to alpha L hydroxylase. Then other CMPs are there, heparin sulfate. So just you remember one or two here. Then MPs and the certain deficiency symptoms are there. So here beta galactosides are there. So severe skeletal dysplasia, short stature, and the motor defunctioning, right? So all these metabolic characteristics are generally seen due to glucose. Then role of hormones in the carbohydrate metabolism. So here you are observing the metabolic and hormonal mechanism regulate the blood glucose level. So here the liver plays the important role. Then extrahepatic tissues and the hormones are there. In this one, role of carbohydrates in dental caries. So carbohydrates cause the loss of caries resistance. Then caries, the process is in the interplay between the oral bacteria, local carbohydrates, and the tooth surface. So bacteria in contact with sugars and teeth are there, so organic acid, and it shows the caries develop. So abnormal glucose metabolism, it causes the diabetes mellitus and the periodontal diseases there. And excessive carbohydrate intake, obesity, that is the thickness or the weight is increasing, and the periodontal disease is developing. About the role of thyroid hormones are there. So hypothyroid and hypoparathyroids are there. So fasting blood glucose is lowered, and in this one fasting blood glucose is elevated. Patient have decreased ability to utilize glucose. Patient utilize glucose at normal or increased rate. So thyroid means we having separate thyroid glands are there. So hyperglycemia and hyperglycemia, so these are there. So they shows the hyperglycemia is there, thirst, dry mouth, polyuria, tiredness, fatigue, or the blurring of vision. Then hyperphagia, mood change, sweating, trembling, anxiety, hunger, then incoordination, inability to concentrate. Like these conditions are developed due to the certain glucose or the hormones are there affecting on this one. Then in cystic fibrosis is there. Fibrosis is the disease of liver. So generally characterized by its high rate and the lateral course, CMD. Commonly it is called CMD. So the patient with CMD have retarded physical development, more pronounced morphofunctional, and the carbohydrates are the major source of for the living cells of energy for the living cells, and glucose is the central molecule in carbohydrate metabolism, so which is actively participating in a number of metabolic pathways. So therefore one component of etiology, that is dental caries, is the carbohydrate, which is act as a substrate for the bacteria. So bacteria get the food from this one. Then in summary of carbohydrate metabolism, as here you see the arrows are there. So amino acids from proteins, nitrogen pool, NH3 ammonia, urea cycle, then CO2 generally generated, and citric acid cycle. Then there are the other pyruvic acid, lactic acid, from glycogen, glucose are there. So fatty acids are there. So they shows the lipogenase is developing. So this is the major role of the carbohydrates. As we have studied the these different crude drugs are there. So here what is the major pathway and what is the role is there in the therapeutic. Therapy means act of use of medicine. So when we are taking any Ayurvedic drug, so it having specific activity. So this is the metabolic pathway of carbohydrate. In next lecture we will see about the metabolic pathway of the proteins. Okay, thanks to all.